I am God. Is there a crazier statement or crazier sounding statement that someone can make? Maybe. But you'll agree with me that most people, when they hear someone say, I am God, they immediately get defensive and list off all the reasons why that isn't true. Well, what if I told you that not only am I God, you're also God, everyone's God, and it is the fundamental truth of the universe, of any multiverse, of anything that's ever existed. It is the most true statement you can make. I am God. For all is God. In Christianity, there are three things that they use to describe God, and that is that God is omnipresent, God is omnipotent, and God is omniscient. What those words mean is God is everywhere, God has all knowledge, and God is all powerful. Now, we have to understand that when I'm using Christianity as an example, I'm not saying that you are some bearded man in the clouds. That's not what God is. That's not what God is at all. What God is consciousness, all consciousness of any living being or unliving being, even inanimate objects. If an inanimate object has consciousness, that is also God's consciousness. So think of a consciousness that encompasses all of existence. And then everything within that consciousness is itself just more consciousness. It's things created by consciousness. My hand right now is consciousness. It, like, the way you can think of it is there's a living entity, a little node of God consciousness sitting right here, and it typically goes by the name Brandon Rowe, and it has a certain job and friends and all this stuff. But what's important is that consciousness that's behind Brandon Rowe, that's what Brandon truly is. Brandon isn't a human being. Brandon is pure consciousness. And Brandon's hand exists within this pure consciousness. It's actually created by this pure consciousness. The consciousness of you, or ultimately the consciousness of God, has the power to change anything within it. This was made apparent to me when I was on an LSD trip. It came to me that one of the main things that I learned the first time I took LSD was that at any moment, every last thing in existence can change. And it can change without explanation. You can just see anything can change. That's the power of consciousness. That's the power of God. Anything that any physical laws, scientific laws that you think exist, they all have been superseded in the past. That's how you get people like Jesus Christ healing people, turning water to wine, walking on water. There were other religious figures who also did these things. Not necessarily turning water to wine. I think that was a unique to Jesus thing. But walking on water definitely was done by Buddha and Krishna, some people would argue. So anyway, we understand kind of now a little bit of what God actually is. Now I want to give an example from Hinduism. So there's the idea in Hinduism that Atman is Brahman. And what Atman is your higher self, your kind of like self-actualized self, your higher spiritual self that you can become, or you already are that, you just can become conscious of it and live it more fully. So there's that's the Atman. your inner higher spiritual self, your soul in a sense, or your spirit, and then Brahman, which is all consciousness within all living things. And that is one version of God in Hinduism. There are many different facets of what God is in Hinduism, but Brahman is one of the more well-known ones. So what this statement is saying is that your higher self is equal to God. Like when you're fully immersed in your higher self and actually fully living that, at your fundamental true nature, you are the Atman, and the Atman is Brahman. You are God. Now, this is an important thing. You right now don't feel like you're God. Okay? We both know that. But you can realize that you are God. That is an experience that you can have. I've had that experience 3 times in 3 different methods. One was on magic mushrooms. That was the first time. The next was in a manic episode with my bipolar disorder, which is a very spiritual experience for me every single time. A lot of people don't understand the spiritual nature of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, things like that. But that's for another video. I have some videos about that actually already. And then the last was taking LSD. And I took high doses on the mushrooms and the LSD to have this experience. And it was exactly kind of like what you would, well, you can never expect what God consciousness is going to feel like. But I'll tell you a quick rundown of what it was like. So you just become intensely conscious. You realize that you have created everything that you've ever experienced, everything in the world. It sounds funny, but the realization I had while I was on the mushrooms was that I, as God, was the one who created magic mushrooms. And one of the reasons I created them, I actually, when I had the insight, it was the only reason they were created was to awaken me to God consciousness again. Like that was the purpose of mushrooms in my experience of this reality. They were literally put here so that I could become conscious that I am God again. And God, you love to play the game of not knowing you're God. It's just the most thrilling thing to God, is to be itself, but act as if it's not. It's like a divine game of hide and seek. But I will tell you, possibly the most rewarding and amazing experience that you could ever have just might be awakening to God consciousness yourself. Realizing that all along your whole life, whatever miseries or suffering that you went through, you were God the whole time, and you created all of this, and you created all of it for your own fancy. And that's just how it is. So also you realize that everything is your creation. I remember on the manic episode, God consciousness experience, I was in a forest and there were people walking by me. And I knew in that moment that I was looking at them as if they were my creation, because I knew that they were. I knew that these people, the rocks, the trees, everything was my creation. It wasn't Brandon Rowe's creation. It was my Atman, the Brahman. It was that creation. That's what was going on. is I realized that I'm not Brandon Rowe, or at least that's not the whole story. I'm also this higher consciousness entity that has been lying dormant in this body mind of mine the whole time. There was that spirit behind, and in these God consciousness experiences that you personally as well can have, you realize that you've always been the spirit and you will always be the spirit. The spirit is indestructible. You've created everything. You're doing it all. It's a really crazy thing to kind of come to understand, but it's the truth. But and one thing to realize with this "I am God" statement is that everyone is God. Every animal is God. Every rapist is God. Every murderer is God. Every one of them is one node of consciousness within this vast network of consciousness that in its totality is God. But you can become so conscious that even while you're in a limited human body, you can connect to these other nodes of consciousness. You can connect to this infinite field of consciousness, and you might do it only in a small part, or you could technically connect to all of this. You could connect to every last node. That would be some intense God consciousness, which I fully believe is possible. I haven't experienced it myself, but from what I've read and learned and thought about, contemplated, it's pretty clear that that is a possibility for a human being. And it's certainly possible after you're no longer a human being. Once you're not limited by a human meat suit, things start to get really interesting. And then you get all the stories about what happens when we die. We go to hell, we go to heaven, we go to the third planet of Krishna. Who knows? Like, what? Who knows? But there's certainly a lot more there. But anyway, I've given you a bit of a rundown on what God is and how you are God, and also the fact that you can be conscious that you are God. You can become conscious. It's literally like remembering something that you forgot for years. You remember that you've been God all along. It's really interesting. It's an amazing experience. And I hope you guys will have it. The best ways to reach that are meditation, yoga, studying spiritual texts, and the quickest route is psychedelics. A lot of people don't like that. That is what's suggested to find God. But I have to be honest, from my own experience, for most people, especially in the West, who grew up under Christianity and all this, your best shot at experiencing God consciousness is a high dose of a psychedelic. That's your best shot. That's your easiest route to get there. Doesn't mean it's the best route, doesn't mean it's the worst route. It is simply easier and quicker. But I would say if you don't have the spiritual groundwork laid out already, such as reading those spiritual texts, meditating, or trying yoga, or other forms of spirituality, if you go into a psychedelic trip without any of that, it's going to be less likely that you have an experience such as God consciousness. You need to kind of have an understanding of what you're going to get into, even when you don't know what it really means or how powerful and profound it can be. It does help to have something to stand on, some foundation. But anyway, that's all for this video. I make videos weekly, sometimes a little bit more frequently than that. So subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will be having a lot more come out just like it. Thanks for watching.